Welcome to the Alyosha Society. Why? Why would I welcome you here? Because right here is where we're pursuing truth, beauty, and goodness through great literature. This is poetry unit number 3, and we're looking at Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson here. You should have already watched the introductory video. It's all review, but repetition's the mother of all learning. I reviewed the 5 different kinds of poetry we're talking about, the rules, knowing the rules, understanding meter and rhyme schemes and literary devices. It's going to enrich your experience, help you understand the poetry a lot better. So let's get right to it. As I said, we are going to be looking at Edgar Allan Poe. Let me get the video. So there we go. There we go. So again, we're in video number 2 here. So we're going to do Edgar Allan Poe in this video, Edgar Allan Poe in the next video, and then 2 videos on Emily Dickinson. So let's get right to it. These are the 5 different kinds of poetry that we talked about. Remember, I want to keep saying this over and over. I'm not saying these are the only 5 kinds of poetry. Poetry is just a vast field. There's all kinds of different poetry. I just chose 5 that I know you're going to encounter and 5 that I think you'd enjoy. So understanding what the rules are for these 5 different kinds of poetry, it'll make a lot more sense to you. So there we go. Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson. Remember, historical biographical approach means that we're going to learn a little bit about the author. What was Edgar Allan Poe like? Why did he write? To whom did he write? When did he write? All those things. And then we'll get to genre and so forth. So first of all, I want you to take note of his years. 1809, 1849. Edgar Allan Poe was, yes, that's right, just 40 years old when he died. Yeah, I know some of you young buckaroos think that's old. That is not old. That is not old at all. We'll talk about this a little bit later. There's some mystery, very appropriately, I think, surrounding the death of Edgar Allan Poe. It seems like we're not really sure exactly how he died, or are we even sure if he died? No, I'm just kidding. No, it's not like an Elvis thing. All right. We know that he did die, but how he died is a bit of a mystery. We'll talk about that later. But let's just walk down through a little bit of bio here. First of all, he was not born Edgar Allan Poe. His name was Edgar Poe. So why do we call him Edgar Allan Poe? Well, here's why. Before I get to the bio here and look through it, sadness, darkness, depression, just a tragic life all around. So when Edgar Poe was one year old, his alcoholic father abandoned him and his mother. Terrible. When he was 2 years old, his mother died. So here we have Edgar Poe, 2 years old, no parents. So he was taken in not by relatives. These are not kinfolk. This was a family. The Allen family took him in 1810, and they gave their last name as a part of his middle name, or as his middle name. So that's why he's called Edgar Allan Poe. Now you know. The family, so he would have been 6 years old. The Allen family moved to England in 1815. They came back 5 years later and settled in the Richmond, Virginia area. And Edgar Allan Poe spent a lot of time in the, let's say, Central Virginia, Maryland, Baltimore in particular. And so they came back in 1820 when he was 11 years old. And, you know, when you think of Edgar Allan Poe, if you know anything at all about him, you probably think darkness. You probably think Gothic. You're right on it. His stories are quite dark. They're creepy, they're scary, and probably not for little children. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but he is best known for 2 genres in particular that he wrote in: short stories, friends. I'm going to talk about these a little bit later. There are some of these short stories that, with your parents' permission, you definitely need to check them out. They're pretty fascinating. What an engaging writer Edgar Allan Poe was. So, how do we explain, I think I've said enough. How do you explain that his emphasis is almost exclusively dark and brooding and depressing? Friends, if you're 1 year old and your alcoholic father abandons the family, then your mother dies when you're 2, and you're taken in by folks who aren't even family members, there's family pain there. And, Edgar Allan Poe himself ended up struggling with drugs and alcohol, and his parents are not the only loved ones that he lost who died. And so, he had a wife also that he lost, and he struggled with poverty. So it would be odd if Edgar Allan Poe wrote, like this cheery, happy, flowery, unicorns and puppies kind of poetry, because that just was not his life at all. As I mentioned earlier, there's some mystery surrounding how he died. It could have been from alcoholism. Some scholars think that he committed suicide. So, tragic life, tragic ending. Again, he was only 40 years old. Why is Edgar Allan Poe important to us? Why are we still talking about him? He died more than 150 years ago. Well, first of all, it's the short story. His short stories you are gripped. You are drawn in from the beginning. And you better make sure that you're in a position to be able to finish that short story, because if your experience is like mine, you're not going to be able to put it down. They're very engaging, and you sort of sit on the edge of your seat kind of writing. But he's also not only the father of the short story, but also of the Gothic genre. Look, some of the themes that you'll see in these short stories, like I said earlier, not for children, murder, dismembering a body in a bathtub and hiding it under the floorboards of the kitchen. Haunted houses, common theme. People being buried alive. Yeah, I'm talking about that kind of stuff. So, yeah, mwahahaha. Yeah, and so that was Mr. Etter, that was the worst evil laugh I've ever heard in my life. All right, let me back up and try it again. People being buried alive. Was that better? All right, good. Here's some of the short stories that have some of these disturbing themes in them that maybe at some point you're going to want to read. I won't say anything else. I don't want to be a plot spoiler. A Telltale Heart, probably heard of that one. The Fall of the House of Usher, one of my personal favorites. The Pit and the Pendulum. Now look, when it comes movie night at the Etter house, I'm the guy that wants to watch, some kind of, bite your fingernails thriller. My wife wants to watch a Hallmark movie. She wants to watch just a basic love story. So we're not on the same page. She can't stand these kinds of stories. She goes, why would I want to watch a movie? Why would I want to read a story that makes me nervous the entire time? Okay, fine. She has a point. And, you used to eat a lot of popcorn. That's what I would say. But The Pit and the Pendulum is one such sit on the edge of your seat, nail biter kind of story. What is, what's this movement called officially? Well, scholars use the term dark romanticism. So there is this emphasis on emotion and this effusion of feeling and passion and Gothic, but at the same time, it's dark and it, I think these are good to read. I know there may be some question as to, hey, Mr. Etter, should Christians read this material? Edgar Allan Poe is clearly not a Christian himself, and his themes are dark. Well, I would say this: maybe not everybody. Again, definitely not children. But I think the Gothic genre is important, and I think Christians should read it as you're able to handle it. There is a sense in which the Gothic genre, whether the writer is a Christian or not, is exploring the darkness of man's soul. And you know what? According to Ephesians 2:1 and Romans chapter 3, and according to various passages of scripture, the soul of man is indeed dark. And we are sinners, and we do have guilt, and we do struggle with shame. So the Gothic genre brings these things sort of up to the surface so we can look at them and examine them and talk about them. I think that's helpful. So some tips before you just kind of dive into Edgar Allan Poe. First of all, you may not want to read Edgar Allan Poe all by yourself at 1 a.m. in a cemetery. I'm just going to throw that out there. Yeah, okay. Maybe not the best setting. I would say brace yourself. Review his history if you have a chance, maybe to do a little bit more than I've done here, just to get a even better feel of the pain and the struggles, the difficulty and the death and the darkness that he experienced in his life. And I think it'll help you appreciate him and understand him a little bit better. He's not just, he wasn't just, the weird kid sitting in the back of the classroom, with the black fingernails and Gothic, dress. I mean, there are reasons that people like Edgar Allan Poe write the kinds of things he writes. So review that. We'll look at this later, but I want you to look specifically now as we get to the first poem we're going to look at in this video, The Raven. Alliteration. Fascinating. His use of repetition of words and this kind of droning and this kind of sort of hypnotic feel that you get when you're going through The Raven. And we'll read it. Personification. If you don't remember what that is, we're going to be talking about it in just a minute. The poem is going to be a little bit too long for us to spend the video time here reading it. So when we get to The Raven, I'm going to say, pause the video, read The Raven, and then unpause the video. So one of the suggestions I have there is to go to YouTube and find a reading of The Raven, and there's a ton of them. Yeah, I mean, Morgan Freeman, Vincent Price, all the famous people. But Tom O'Bedlam, I want you to try to find his reading of The Raven, I think captures it best. All right, so just a suggestion. You don't have to do that. You can just read it on your own if you want. But if you want to hear someone read it, maybe, turn off the lights, get the little flashlight, get a little bit of a dark, creepy environment. Yeah, you'll enjoy it. But one way or the other, guys, read it out loud. Either read it out loud yourself or listen to someone read it. So here are the poems that we're going to be looking at by Edgar Allan Poe: The Raven, Annabel Lee, and a poem called Alone. Alone. It's only 3 of them. And one of the reasons for that is the first 2 in particular are longer poems. But I think you're going to get a lot out of these 2 videos, enough to go and enjoy more of his poetry and definitely get into his short stories at some point. So here we go. This is where I'm going to tell you to pause the video, go listen to Tom O'Bedlam read it, and after you've done that, you can unpause the video. Was that pretty good? Is that a good fake pause? See, I know some of you didn't pause it. All right, I'm assuming now that you have paused the video, that you've read The Raven. So let's talk about it. First of all, let's go to our literary toolbox. Remember the literary toolbox? Historical context. We've talked about that. Biographical context. We've talked about that. We'll get into some genre questions here. The main thing we're going to be looking at right now is going to be literary devices. As far as elements of a plot, that's a little bit more of a thing we'd get into when we're reading a novel, but we are gonna discuss the plot or the story of the raven. What in the world is actually going on in this poem? But right now, let's get to some literary devices. So first of all, did you pick up on personification? Like I asked you to. I'm trying to get my videos settled here. Sorry, guys. I can't figure out where to put it. Yeah, this is just, it's going to be a little rude with me. Let me stick it down here. Personification is simple. It's when you take an inanimate object and you give it qualities that only a human being would have. You know, like if there's a tree that's talking, I know they're the ants, but you know what I mean. For anytime you take an inanimate object and it's speaking or it's doing something that only a human can do, well, what's happening in this poem? Well, I don't know. I shouldn't have said only an inanimate object, should I? Yeah, because a bird is an animate object. So I take that back. When you take a non-human thing and give it human attributes, bam. So I'm not even crazy about the definition I have up here. It says giving human attributes to non-living things. Yes, that is personification, but it can also be giving human attributes to animals. Okay, so the raven here is talking. The raven is talking. Did you hear what I said? It's speaking. And it's not just saying, caw, caw. Okay, it's using English words. That's personification. That, my friends, is extremely important in this poem. Because what essentially is happening in this poem is that the poet, because of his deep despair and depression, is descending into madness. He's going crazy. He's losing his mind because he's so depressed. Why is he so depressed? Well, I hope you figured that out. We'll talk about it in a minute. So, did the raven really speak? Hey, look, birds don't talk like that. You know, they only talk like that when you think they're talking like that, when you're losing your mind. So personification, very important. The next one, let's take a look at some imagery here to help you feel pain and horror and grief. You see the silken, sad, uncertain, the rustling of curtains. The imagery is off the charts in this poem. One of my favorites too, you know, I don't know, maybe it's because it kind of brings out the fourth grader in me. Onomatopoeia. What? Onomata who? Onomatopoeia is when you use a word that the only purpose of the word is to resemble the sound that that thing makes. You know, like boom or bark, bark, ruff. Okay. That's the worst dog imitation ever. Those are onomatopoeia. Okay, so you've got rapping and tapping, and you've got various examples of onomatopoeia, which kind of bring this poem. It just gives it a sense of vividness and a sense that you're hearing it, that you're seeing it, that you're experiencing it with more of your five senses. That you're not just reading something, that you're there. You can hear it. And then alliteration, all over the place in this poem. The two different kinds of alliteration we're looking at here, consonants and assonants. So when consonants, TS, are repeated over and over, that's consonants. I nodded nearly napping. N. On his home by horror haunted, repetition of the H sound. All over the place. Poe just does a brilliant job of consonants. And then assonance is when you do the same thing, except with a vowel sound. So dreary, weak, and weary. Okay. Dreaming, dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. So you have some repetition and then specifically assonance along with the repetition there. Just lots of cool things going on. Well, I hope you enjoyed the poem. So let's just kind of walk through what's going on here. First of all, The rhyme scheme and the meter are very unusual. Not used a whole lot, but boy, Edgar Allan Poe makes the most of it. If you'll notice the rhyme scheme here, you have an ABC, BBB. So you have a line ending in a sound, different sound, different sound. Then in the fourth line, it goes back to the second line and rhymes it 3 times. I don't have that poem written out. So what I am going to have to do is see what I got to do. Give me just a second here to pull it up. I may have to just pause the video. I don't really like to do that, but okay. So for example, let me just read the very first section. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weekend weary. Okay, so that's our A. Weary is our A. Over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. Now remember guys, the B is really important because the B is always going to be the last 3 lines. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping. So now we have a C, but notice in the last 3 lines, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. To some visitor I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, nothing more. So ABC, BBB. But notice also, guys, that every opening line rhymes with itself. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weekend weary. Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain. Stronger, longer, peering, fearing, turning, burning, shudder, flutter. Okay, Mr. Eder, we get it. Okay, we got the message there. Now, what is the meter in this poem? Oh my friends, it is not a frequently used meter. The meter in this poem is called trochaic octameter. Now, here's what I want you guys to do. Trochaic octameter. Next time you're having dinner, just a nice quiet dinner with your family and everybody's just sitting around and somebody says, how was your day? I want you with a straight face, don't giggle. I want you to just say, well, you know, we learned a little bit about some this and that, and then we kind of talked about some trochaic hectameter and what? Can somebody pass the potatoes? Yeah, just kind of throw it out there. Okay, it's a big fancy word. Let me see if I can explain what it means. So the trochaic has the idea that this thing is moving on. It's running in a sense. Octameter, of course, means 8. But when you look at the lines, you see, wait a second, Mr. Eder, there are more than 8 syllables in each line. Yeah, there are. There's actually 16. But there are 8 stressed syllables. So it's da 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 da. So stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, straight through. Now he kind of breaks out of it a little bit here and there, but not much. Listen to this. Open here I flung the shudder when with men you flirt and flutter. In there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. You see that? Stressed, unstressed, stressed. They just alternate back and forth. That is an example of trochaic octameter. So, and then there's this, you know, this is supposed to be a creepy, kind of scary poem, you know, and how does Poe do that? It's this haunting repetition over and over. And, you know, I think that's a great tool to pull out of the literary toolbox to use if you're trying to depict someone who's losing his mind. And that's exactly what's happening in this poem. Let me skip down to the bottom, maybe find a good example for you. Wow. So many good sections. And the raven, never flitting, still sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. All his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. My soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor. And then there's this haunting repetition. Every single section ends with the same word. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And then the ending, shall be lifted nevermore. Yeah. And I think Tom O. Bedlam really reads that very well. So I guess last things to talk about. What's going on in this poem? What is actually happening? And I hope you picked up on this. But the poet, you have to feel bad for the poet. He just lost his true love, Lenore. We have to assume that Lenore just recently passed away. And the poet is sitting in his study and he has all of his books and he talks about, he's using his books to hopefully distract him from his depression and his pain and his suffering over having lost the love of his life. But what he cannot help, what he cannot fix, what he cannot hold off is the madness that is going to overcome him as he descends into basically a state of insanity throughout the poem. This raven is talking to him. And then also you notice the raven comes and sits on a bust. A bust is like this. Okay, this is a bust. But the bust that the raven is sitting on is of Pallas. Who is that? That's Pallas Athena. Athena was the Greek goddess of wisdom. So the raven has now conquered wisdom in his life, rationality, sanity. You see, the raven is just going to, and that tells us the fact that this guy had a bust of Pallas Athena in his study tells us that he probably valued rationality and sanity and wisdom, but the raven has overcome it. The pain and the suffering from losing his Lenore has taken that away from him. It's really a very haunting and depressing poem. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to point out to you. I don't think so. There's so much more we could talk about. I'm trying to keep these videos down to a minimum. Is there a worldview? That's the last thing I wanted to bring up here. Is there a worldview question here? So let's go back to our slide. Well, of course, there's a worldview in everything. What is the worldview? Is the poet saying there is no hope in life? I don't think so. I don't think he's saying that. Edgar Allan Poe may have actually believed that. But I think what he's doing is just communicating how sad and depressed a person can get and how much despair can enter your life. But I would say this. The truth of the gospel has to come into play here. You lose a loved one. I've lost a loved one. Yeah, it hurts. Yeah, sometimes you feel like you're losing your mind. You feel like, why is this happening? And you wrestle through all of the stages of grief. That's real. Read the book of Job. That's okay. But we are not Christians, that is, we are not those who live ultimately in despair. We do have a hope of the resurrection. And if you don't have that hope, I think I can understand why losing a loved one might cause you to completely lose your mind, because what the raven is communicating to him, to the poet, is you're never going to get better. You're never going to feel right. You're never going to see her again. You're never going to hear her again. Well, according to the Bible, that's not true. That is not true. So you have to balance that. And you have to temper that. I understand the poem. I like the poem in that it's raw. It's real. We all think these things when we're at our lowest points in life sometimes. But according to 1 Corinthians 15, because Jesus was raised from the dead, we still have hope. We still have hope. We may go through a lot of pain, but we don't lose hope like the poet. Yeah. By the way, I just thought I'd throw this out there. Any football fans, any NFL fans? Did you know that the Baltimore Ravens are actually named after Edgar Allan Poe's poem? Yeah. What? Mr. Edgar, come on. No, remember? I mentioned it earlier. He lived in Baltimore. In fact, he even died in Baltimore in 1849. So there you have it. Who knew? Who knew there could be an intersection of, pro sports and 19th century literature? But that is the case. Friends, I've enjoyed this first video on Edgar Allan Poe. The next one, we're going to look at Annabel Lee and Alone. That will be video number 3. So we'll see you then.